On this Wednesday night, a black teenager in Ohio shot and killed by police. Ma'Khia Bryant's final moments caught on camera.
It's a tragedy. There's no other way to say it. It's a 16-year-old girl.
Police urge the community to await the facts. Plus, hope Derek Chauvin's conviction is a turning point.
African American people, we feel that we never get justice.
Too many patients at Ontario hospitals, how facilities are freeing up beds in the COVID crisis. From crushing the curve to soaring infections, the crisis in India. Now a COVID hotspot again.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening, and thanks for joining us. There is renewed hope for racial justice and police reform in the U.S. after a former Minneapolis police officer was found guilty yesterday of murdering George Floyd. Today, the U.S. Attorney General announced the entire Minneapolis Police Department will be investigated to determine if there is a pattern of unlawful policing. Though within hours of the verdict, another police shooting was making headlines. This one happened in Columbus, Ohio. A 16-year-old black girl was killed. Within hours, police released body cam footage and a warning once again, it is disturbing. Police say they were responding to a call about a disturbance, and what happened unfolded rapidly. The body cam video shows officers approaching a driveway where people are fighting, and one teenager armed with a knife lunges at another, dressed in pink.
Hey, what's going on? Hey, 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 get down, get down, get down, get down. No, you ain't shooting.
An officer fires 4 shots. We have frozen the video at that point. The girl carrying the knife slumps to the ground. Other officers attempted life-saving measures. Police say 16-year-old Ma'Khia Bryant, who was living in foster care, died later in the hospital.
The outrage and emotion around this incident. A teenage girl is dead. And she's dead at the hands of a police officer. Under any circumstances, that is a horrendous tragedy. But the video shows that there is more to this.
Columbus police caution about a rush to judgment. An independent investigation is underway. They say they released the video quickly to be transparent with the public and that officers can fire if someone is facing a deadly threat.
I cannot respond specifically to this specific incident, but what I can say is when officers are faced with someone employing deadly force can be the response the officer gives.
Protesters took to the streets of Columbus last night in anger. Officials say more information and footage will be released if it doesn't compromise the investigation.
Regardless of the circumstances associated with this, a 16-year-old girl lost her life yesterday. And I sure as hell wish it hadn't happened.
The officer who fired at Bryant is Nicholas Reardon. He has been taken off street duty. Ma'Khia Bryant was killed just half an hour before the verdict in the George Floyd murder case was read out. And though what happened in Ohio is still under investigation, it is clear the verdict in Floyd's murder is a beginning, not an end. Mike Armstrong has our top story tonight.
Members of the jury, I will now read the verdict. Says they
even though his freedom was on the line, Derek Chauvin, as the verdict was read,
find the defendant guilty.
Barely reacted.
Oh my God.
Outside the courthouse and across the U.S., there was a very different reaction.
I'm so surprised I ran up here. I'm shocked. I don't even, is it true though?
It's true. Guilty on all 3 counts.
Guilty on all 3 counts, as it should be.
For many, the first wave of relief was followed by that disbelief. Had it really happened?
I've heard not guilty so many times, so like my mind was like, did I hear that right?
Now, how nervous people were about a conviction had a lot to do with their confidence in the justice system. Minnesota's governor says for months he's felt a difference.
I thought the case was solid. Everything in my heart said they're going to get the conviction. And then I would talk to black Minnesotans who would say, we don't believe that. It never works that way.
Thank you.
There is hope this case marked a change. One thing that helped with the conviction was other police officers testifying against Chauvin. The Floyd family says when an officer sees another officer do something wrong, it's their duty to say something.
our prayer, our fervent prayer, part of George Floyd's legacy, is that this will be a precedent.
We have been here before.
Sandra Hudson is one of the founders of Black Lives Matter Canada. Accountability for Chauvin, she says, took a half dozen direct witnesses and a 9-minute video of the killing. Most victims and their families don't usually get so much evidence.
Yeah, it's a really high bar.
But what the conviction has done, she says, is make public debate about police powers more mainstream.
That's absolutely true. We can't stop now because this isn't the end.
One lesson from this case some point to is the power of pressure. The organizer of this march in Montreal last spring says protests made it impossible for Chauvin's actions not to land him in front of a judge.
If it was not for the mobilization worldwide, I don't think this verdict will be the same, or I don't think everything would have happened the same way.
The Floyd family says it hopes the movement continues to turn pain into purpose. Mike Armstrong, Global News, Montreal.
Derek Chauvin, who now faces up to 40 years in prison, will be sentenced in 8 weeks. He's being held in an isolated wing of Minnesota's only maximum security prison, Oak Park Heights. The prison says it's because of concerns for his safety. The facility has a reputation for housing notorious criminals. Chauvin is in solitary confinement and is allowed out for 1 hour a day to exercise. In Ontario, an investigation is underway after a police officer was captured on video shoving a child on a scooter. The video was captured Sunday at a skate park in the town of Gravenhurst. The park was closed under Ontario's stay-at-home order. The OPP says officers stopped a group of young people who weren't physically distancing or wearing masks. The man who captured the video told Global News he believes the incident was unprovoked.
Some kids were giving bad mouth, but the kid that got pushed over, he wasn't giving any lip, nothing. He was cooperating.
The OPP says the officer has been reassigned to administrative duties pending an independent investigation. There is more trouble for the Ontario government as it grapples with spiking cases of COVID-19. Premier Doug Ford is now in self-isolation after one of his aides tested positive. The Premier's office says Ford tested negative himself yesterday, but under Toronto public health guidelines, he must self-isolate for 14 days. Hospital ICUs in Ontario continue to overflow with people sick with COVID-19. A record 790 Ontarians are now in intensive care. More than 560 of them are on ventilators. In some hospitals, resources are stretched so thin, patients are now being transferred to other hospitals around the province. Abigail Bimman reports on the desperate moves by a healthcare system struggling to keep up.
Finding space and getting COVID-positive patients to the right bed across Ontario is so complex, one ICU doctor called it critical care hopscotch.
The idea is to create these concentric circles. So we want to be able to keep receiving patients from, that Oshawa area so that Oshawa can in turn take patients from the real super hotspots.
Dr. Christy Lee's downtown Toronto ICU has been accepting patients from hospitals even more overloaded than hers in the Greater Toronto area, while they call in non-ICU doctors to help and are opening a third ICU space.
Surgeons and anesthesiologists that are basically now sort of changing their scopes of practice to come and help us care for COVID patients.
In Kingston Tuesday, the ICU had 44 patients. 43 were from out of town. The hospital is boosting capacity.
We are starting to feel the pressure.
Transferring ICU patients is its own challenge. Since January, Orange's Operations Centre had about 200 requests a month. In the first 3 weeks of April alone, 570.
So they're quite complex and it can be difficult to ventilate. So it's unusual for us to do that many persistently back to back.
Orange boosted capacity by more than 200%. Even the chief medical officer has joined the front lines.
We can create more critical care land ambulances. We can't really create any more helicopters or fixed wing aircraft.
So while it's more challenging to get a patient from Toronto to Ottawa, that city's chief medical officer says it has accepted about 20 from the GTA. And the first adult has now been admitted to the city's children's hospital.
We hear on a regular basis that be prepared to take more each day. And so we're not expecting that to slow down.
Dr. Simpson of Ontario Health says nothing is off the table in terms of transferring patients. So while the focus is moving patients inside Ontario, they're considering the idea of out-of-province transfers and even to U.S. border cities in New York and Michigan. Abigail Bimman, Global News, Ottawa.
Ontario is expecting a shortage of more than 4,000 nurses in the hospital sector over the next 4 months, and the need for ICU nurses is most acute. They care for the sickest patients and are sometimes caring for entire families. Caryn Lieberman spoke to one critical care nurse about the toll it is taking.
He's a younger gentleman in his 40s. He is positive for COVID, and he is on the maximum amount of settings on the ventilator that we can put him on 100% oxygen.
Critical care nurse Laura Mailing will spend her shift focused on this one patient.
He FaceTimed his wife and his kids before.
Her patient is among the sickest in the hospital and requires constant, complex care.
We give them sedation, and we have to manage their blood pressure, and giving medications like that can only be given here in ICUs.
The shifts are grueling, and the caseload can, at times, feel hopeless, because despite Laura's best efforts, many patients won't survive.
My patient was very young, in her 40s, and she passed away of COVID, and it was like we felt so helpless.
Laura is weeks away from maternity leave. Filling her shoes will be challenging. In addition to beds and equipment, there's a need for specialized staff. Right now, they're just not available, and yet the COVID patients keep coming.
We do have redeployed staff that are able to help assist the nurse in providing care, so we're able to stretch that model a bit. The question, of course, is, how far can we stretch?
More than a year into the pandemic, they're stretched thin.
Ontario has the lowest RN per population in the country.
The CEO of the Registered Nurses Association of Ontario says she long warned of a major nursing shortage in the province. Now it's become clear this precious healthcare resource is lacking.
800 new beds multiplied by 4 each, plus all the others, right? Plus we are putting now people in other places, and you are going to deplete every single other unit.
Overnight was 600 mils.
As Laura gets set to leave the hospital, Ontario ICUs are becoming ground zero during this third wave of the pandemic.
We're just treading water here in the ICU. We're just managing.
Caryn Lieberman, Global News, Toronto.
A Canadian military member on why she filed a complaint against General Jonathan Vance. Coming up, a Global News exclusive. The Canadian military is facing a reckoning over allegations of high-level sexual misconduct. Parliamentary committees have been digging into accusations, first reported by Global News, and hearing from dozens of witnesses. But one voice has been noticeably absent, that of the woman who came forward in 2018 with allegations against the former Chief of the Defence Staff. Now, she wants to clarify why and how she reported General Jonathan Vance. Our Ottawa Bureau Chief Mercedes Stevenson has the exclusive details.
The woman who General Jonathan Vance allegedly sent a now notorious email to says she wanted the Minister of National Defence, Harjit Sajjan, to know about the email and that she thought the minister would take action. But that's not what happened.
It all started out with this email. It's what was in the envelope military ombudsman Gary Walborn tried to hand Minister Harjit Sajjan in 2018. Inside was an email chain in which Vance, who had approached a young woman corporal offering career advice, suggested if they couldn't find a convenient time to meet for a professional coffee or beer in Ottawa, we could throw caution to the wind and escape to a clothing-optional island in the Caribbean. Global News has obtained the email and spoken with the woman. We have agreed to protect her identity as she is now a reserve military officer and fears career repercussions. She agreed to talk after repeated requests by Global News, willing to tell her truth. Vance vastly outranked the woman at the time of the email, and she was uncomfortable with the sexual insinuation. She believed Vance was making an inappropriate joke, but beyond that, there was an undercurrent that would bother her for years. People don't say those things unless they're testing the waters, she said. Vance has said he doesn't recall sending the email, but that if he did, it was meant as a joke not allowed under policies he would later implement. 6 years later, as an officer wanting to lead by example on sexual misconduct, the woman made the difficult decision to report the country's top soldier. She approached the military ombudsman because she knew he would have to go to the minister, who could do something, and she was concerned about the integrity of Operation Honor and the forces. My intent was never to make this public or widely known, she said. It was for the minister to deal with it at an appropriate time and perhaps reconsider how Operation Honor was commanded. A time the woman thought like when the government was deciding on the general's future, including extending his term. The Trudeau government made Vance Canada's longest-serving chief of the defence staff. He remained in office for almost 3 years after the concerns were brought forward.
The Liberal government has defended its lack of action, saying it couldn't proceed without the name of the woman. But she says she asked the Ombudsman to protect her identity and thought the email would be proof enough for the minister and others. Mercedes Stevenson, Global News, Ottawa.
Ahead, the variant first detected in India lands in Canada. What's being done to reduce the risk of it spreading? The variant first detected in India is now in Canada. Quebec has identified what's believed to be the first confirmed case in the country. It's not clear how it got here, but there are still daily flights between India and Canada. And there's concern the variant is fueling a terrible fourth wave in India. Redmond Shannon reports.
Another virus victim. Another mourning family. Parts of India are in the grip of a COVID-19 crisis. Hospitals are short on beds and oxygen. This hospital oxygen leak is being blamed for 22 patient deaths. Crematoriums are working around the clock, and the capital is among regions currently in lockdown. For months, cases dropped in India, leading some to think it had achieved a type of herd immunity, a naive assumption for a mutating virus, according to Dr. Prabhat Jha.
The sense that the first infection would take care and immunize the population really hasn't occurred.
Researchers are still trying to establish whether the B1617 variant, first found in India and now in Canada, is more infectious.
It's undoubtable that the big spike that's occurring now is because of these variants. You see them occurring in younger population. You see them occurring in different geographic areas.
Jha says it's likely there are more cases of the variant in Canada that haven't yet been detected.
I think there are slightly over 100 such cases that we've identified here in the UK.
The UK is about to ban airport arrivals for all foreigners who've recently been in India.
I have asked our officials to look carefully at, for example, what the UK has done very recently on suspending flights from India.
But for now, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says airport testing and quarantine measures are effective in reducing the risk of importing new variants. Not all experts agree.
Personally, looking into the situation we're in, right now we can't wait for conclusive evidence. Right now, the precautionary principle will tell you need to react.
The better news is that the specific mutations in B1617 suggest vaccines should work against the variant. Redmond Shannon, Global News, London.
Next, a guilty verdict delivers hope for racial justice in George Floyd's city. For 11 months, the spot on the street where George Floyd took his final breaths has been ground zero for grief and outrage. President Biden said yesterday his murder here in the full light of day ripped the blinders off for the whole world to see the systemic racism in America. People have occupied George Floyd Square to keep up the pressure for racial justice and police reform. And as Heather Yurix West reports, the struggle is far from over.
For nearly a year, the mood in Minneapolis has been heavy. There has been sadness, there has been rage. And this week, there has been a lot of anxiety, too.
There has just been this tense, pregnant feeling in the air since the jury began its deliberation.
So when the verdict came down, the sense of relief was overwhelming.
When I heard the verdict, I just screamed and I shouted and I said, "Thank you, God."
Last night when I got home, I think I was asleep before 9.
Jamar Nelson listened to the verdict from the crowd outside of court.
I had knots in my stomach because I was hoping that he got convicted on the 3rd degree and the manslaughter. Was not anticipating that he would be convicted on all 3 counts.
But Nelson knows there is still so much work left to be done. While the Derek Chauvin's trial was taking place in nearby Brooklyn Center, another black man, 20-year-old Dante Wright, was killed by another member of the police. Kim Potter has been charged with 2nd-degree murder.
She too should face justice and the arm of the law.
The murder of George Floyd sparked global protests. As painful as his final moments were to watch, they were also impossible to ignore.
I'd say overall, this verdict feels like a brief bit of relief, right? It feels like a measure of accountability, which many people doubted could happen here.
But Palmisano admits in Minneapolis nothing has been fixed. The city is still grappling with how its police department should be reformed. Still, the importance of this moment in time cannot be discounted.
These things help because now you can now encourage our black and brown boys and girls to become officers, to change, to be the change that they want to be.
And so, while there is no joy with this verdict, there is hope. Heather Yurex West, Global News, Calgary.
And that is Global National for this Wednesday. I'm Donna Friesen. This is Queen Elizabeth II's birthday. She turns 95 today, but there is no celebration. It has been just 4 days since the funeral of her husband, Prince Philip. Buckingham Palace released a photo and a statement thanking people for the many good wishes and saying, well, as a family, we are in a period of great sadness. It has been a comfort to us all to see and to hear the tributes paid to my husband. Thanks for watching. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.